will address the controversial Veterinary Feed Directive. Mr. Richard Sellers from the American Feed Industry Association. Mr. Sellers is the Senior Vice President of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs. He has been with the American Feed Industry Association for 25 years. He is going to speak today on the opportunities and the massive challenges facing the sheep industry. Mr. Sellers.
You don't have to applaud.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I bring you greetings from Washington, whether you want them or not. I think the Undersecretary did an admirable job, and that it's quite impressive to follow him. Lamb is my favorite meat. It plays a major role in our family celebrations. Our children grew up, instead of turkey and ham, with leg of lamb a la Julia Child. I mean, if you're familiar with that recipe, it's incredible, and it is so simple. Garlic, Dijon mustard, and olive oil overnight in the refrigerator, and then they argue over the leftovers. I have to buy my wife Swiss cheese so she can have lamb sandwiches for the week. We cut it up and put the leftover pieces on Mediterranean pizza. It is a treat to behold, and if we don't have lamb on Christmas or Easter, we have a crown roast of lamb. I didn't grow up with lamb. My parents didn't like lamb, and when I met my wife 35 years ago, she said, I want you to try some new things. I want you to try vegetables fresh that have color and vitamins, because I grew up with a family that grew up in Arkansas in the Depression, and they tended to buy cheap foods. I ate spinach out of a can for years and years and loved it. And when I discovered fresh spinach, I decided I couldn't get enough. So my wife brought me into the 20th century when we got married in 1981. And although she likes turkey, my kids and I don't like turkey. And we don't have turkey but once every decade for her. So as Paul Rogers knows, who invited me, I'm a big grilling and smoking person. I've got 5 grills, and 3 of them are smokers, and I talked Paul into buying. Paul, I found a new one, and it's got a remote control on it. So I don't have to go onto the porch out on Christmas to smoke, although this year in Washington, Christmas was 72 degrees. For the first time ever, I smoked that leg of lamb with the mustard plaster on it, and it was fabulous. It was absolutely incredible with a mesquite chip smoker. And I highly recommend smoked lamb, or any lamb. What I'm really excited to tell you is one of the downscale, low-end grocery stores in our area now carries American lamb, which shocked me, because I couldn't buy in a grocery store without going to a butcher on the East Coast anything but New Zealand or Australian lamb, and I find that a little troubling to have to pay for that carbon footprint across the world. So now Shoppers Food Warehouse, which actually caters to the international crowd, there are vegetables and herbs and things, and they sell goat meat of the kind that I've not seen in the United States. It is imported from all over the world. So it's really nice to be able to buy those large lamb chops instead of those little tiny ones that get squeezed packed from some ship across the Pacific. But lamb is our food of choice. And in this election year, which has really got me alarmed, we're a bipartisan organization. We have to work with both parties, but I don't see anybody about governance in there right now, unfortunately. But it'll shake out at the conventions. And in this election year, you need to remind the consuming public that lamb was the preferred meat of our founding fathers and mothers, and brothers and sisters. And if you go in and you look at the mountvernon.org website, you'll see that George Washington had lamb every morning for breakfast, cold lamb for breakfast. I don't know where he got the refrigeration, but he did have cold lamb for breakfast. He liked a simple meal, but he ate a lot of it, was the way they described it. So that's a marketing campaign, the preferred meat of our brothers and sisters and founding mothers and fathers. So I'm going to get here to talk about the reason you call me up here. The Veterinary Feed Directive, I'll blame that on Dave Bosman, who's sitting over there, because he was the founding father of Veterinary Feed Directive. And it has worked quite well up until this point. And for one reason, we knew this day was coming. We knew we were going to lose growth promotion feed efficiency drugs. And the reason we did the Veterinary Feed Directive was FDA came out and said we want prescription medicated feed. The way the marketplace works and the way the state pharmacy boards work, that would have become a commodity and a drug that would have required a 5-6 foot counter and a feed mill and a veterinarian and or a pharmacist to dispense that prescription medicated feed. And Dave, being in the industry so many years, knew that that wouldn't work. 38 states pharmacy boards laws would have regulated that commodity. Ever since about the mid-1970s, when the National Academy of Sciences put out a report on the penicillins, we knew this day was coming. We knew that we were going to lose growth promotion feed efficiency drugs for all the wrong science reasons. I blame it on the internet. I blame a lot of things on the internet. I think blogs and mommy blogs and that crazy woman, whatever her name, food blog mom or whatever her name is, it's caused us a lot of consternation in getting to the point that we are. Activist groups in this administration have a very large voice, good, bad, or indifferent. And our concern about that has been they've driven antibiotic resistance along with Consumer Reports and other organizations, especially the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a name that's not allowed to be mentioned in my household, toward an idea that we're causing people to die and suffer from antibiotic resistance when the scientific findings are not that case. As a matter of fact, when we took fluoroquinolones out of the feed supply some 10 years ago, antibiotic resistance is still going up in fluoroquinolones. It is the nature of bacteria and their evolution of any living organism to find a way to live and to live better for succeeding generations. So they're going to find a way to get out of it. Resistance happens as soon as you start feeding a new drug. We've also discovered in the European Union, where they've done this 20 years ago, that resistance is rising. And they've got a number of controls that we don't. The good thing about our controls that FDA is going to put on it, and we will still be allowed to do prevention on animals in feed. So the Veterinary Feed Directive provision was created in the Animal Drug Availability Act of 1996, of which ASI was a part. It was one of the largest coalitions I've ever seen now or since then. It consisted, even the state pharmacy board was there, and Dave Bosman called them all together because basically the Center for Veterinary Medicine at FDA came to us and said, you're going to lose these drugs unless we can do some protection on the new drugs that are coming out. And we promise you, I can still see him saying that, we will never make any of the current or old drugs retroactive. It's happened. It's happened now. It's happening now. And on January 1, all of that will come to fruition. I'm not happy with it. Our members are really not happy with it. You as customers aren't happy with it. And we're trying to do the best we can. I've given antibiotics resistance to Jesus because there's not anything I can do about it. It's one of those things that good, bad, or indifferent, we're in this boat, and the alternative is that Congress would take it up and you will lose these drugs in their entirety. The Dutch government is now talking about taking therapeutic use of these antibiotics away from their producers. I can't imagine the science that shows that that's beneficial, that we ship sick animals to the marketplace. But it's very, very clear what's happening and how we need to work with FDA. So the Veterinary Feed Directive is really a quite simple process. It's not rocket science. Even veterinarians can do it. I've spent 40 years of my career keeping veterinarians out of feed mills, and now they're my BFFs. Good, bad, or indifferent. Some of my best friends now are veterinarians. The way it works, and it's quite complicated, or FDA's made it quite complicated, because think of the VFD as permission to use a drug, okay? And for a feed mill, it's permission to manufacture. But we can manufacture without a VFD, but we can't dispense it, we can't sell it or distribute it without a valid VFD. So a veterinary feed directive is both the form and the drug. The VFD drug, VFD medicated feed, and the VFD form. So here's a simple way it works. You got a sick animal, you call the veterinarian, or the veterinarian stops by and says, you need this VFD drug. He or she issues a document to you. It can be electronic. There's one in the marketplace and another 4 coming on board. We're really working to get those groups, electronic groups, to talk to each other, because FDA does authorize eVFDs, electronic VFDs. So the veterinarian says, you need this. I'm going to give you this form. It is specific for this drug. The veterinarian may not change any part of what the drug regulation says you can use this for. And this will authorize you over a 90-day to 6-month period, depending on the drug, to use this drug with your animals. Okay? You select, or the veterinarian forwards to, via an eVFD, a feed distributor. It can be a dealer. It can be a feed manufacturer. It can be a veterinarian. The law's unspecific on that. It is defined by whether they are a distributor or not. Okay? Then they fill the VFD order and distribute that VFD medicated feed to you. There's a couple of things that have to happen in the interim. In order for that drug just not to flow around the marketplace like they do now as over-the-counter drugs, any feed distributor, and sheep producers can be a feed distributor. They can sell it on to other places, but they have to sign an acknowledgement letter to whoever gives them that drug that they will not give that drug to anyone else unless they have a similar acknowledgement letter or a valid VFD. And therein is the major control of this drug in the marketplace. Secondly, whoever receives the drug has to write a letter to FDA, I'm sorry, you have to do this, that says, I got a VFD drug and I'm going to distribute it. You only have to do that once. And those are all published online now, except unless you're a producer. Producers receiving VFD drugs is between you and your veterinarian and feed company, and that's a confidential transaction and prohibited from freedom of information disclosure. Okay? So, VFD is authorized by the veterinarian who keeps the original, gives it to producer or to the feed mill that authorizes its manufacture and distribution, and then a letter of acknowledgement to the drug supplier, a letter of notice to the FDA, and everybody, the producer, the veterinarian, and the feed company, have to hold these documents for 2 years. I don't like that provision. We originally talked FDA into 2, and some activist groups got to them and said, no, you need this stuff longer than that. I can't possibly imagine in the 16 years we've had VFDs, why would we want to keep it, actually 20 years we've had VFD, that we want to keep it longer than that. One of the problems we have right now is you may not keep that record electronically. It has to be a paper record unless you have validated your system under a complicated set of regulations known as Part 11, Electronic Records and Signatures. We are hoping to get that repealed so that feed mills that get paper records over the first 6 months of this process aren't saving thousands and thousands of records. So what are the drugs that are going to be utilized? They are those drugs, mostly old drugs, streptomycins, penicillins, sulfamethazine, sulfa drugs, not ionophores, not coccidiostats, not dewormers, not bambamycin, not bacitracin, but those drugs that are considered dual-use drugs. And by dual use, I mean they're important in human medicine and in animal medicine. And we remind the agency over and over again, do not forget these drugs are important in animal medicine. Those are the single-species veterinarians practicing at FDA that are known as physicians, medical doctors. They're the ones that are driving so much of this. So the president held a high-level antibiotic resistance conference in which I attended, and a number of my colleagues attended. Paul, I don't know if you were there. Somebody from ASI was probably there. And on that day, they also released the VFD final rule in 80 pages or less. And I was sitting in the back of the room just poring over that document, trying to figure out what it was. There's a couple of little turns that happened in this. On the VFD form, there used to be, the veterinarian had to estimate the amount of tonnage that had to be manufactured for. We complained for a number of years that we couldn't do that. We couldn't give that to the veterinarian because that would mean they were nutritionists and would hurt our professional pride greatly. And most of them don't have, I don't know if you've seen the veterinarian College of Medicine training, but they don't have any nutrition courses anymore except in pet food. And there are not a whole lot of large animal veterinarians in the United States, which is another issue with this, is where the veterinarian is going to come from. So we believe that we've kind of gotten to the point where we understand how it's going to work, but there are 19 chemical compounds involved in this. Three are already VFD drugs. Two for swine. Well, there's actually, it's complicated when you talk about new animal drugs because the new animal drug is actually the use. The compound, the chemical compound, can be a new animal drug, but the use is actually defined as a chemical. So there are 19 compounds consisting of 283 different uses that are the drugs. So how does this work practically is the drug sponsors, there are 29 of them, have all said, we're going to take these growth promotion claims off and file to do that. And it's going to happen overnight. It's going to alarm us when it happens overnight. But they've all agreed to do that, so they take these off. And all of these drugs have therapeutic uses. And they're at 2 times to 10 times the current use level. Now, most of this is going to heavily impact, 80% of these are going to heavily impact the pork industry. And they're probably the most vocal about how this works, but they've also been using it for 20 years. First VFD drug came out right after the law was approved in 1996. But we're still concerned about how we're going to get there with these 280-something uses. So in practical reality, FDA said in December of 2013 that by 3 years, this all needs to be done by the drug sponsors, or we will take regulatory action. We held their head to the carpet and underwater and said, what action could you possibly take? Are you going to move in an emergency session to declare these drugs unsafe and remove them from the marketplace like you did with fluoroquinolone? Because the data are not there and you know it. And they said, we haven't decided what we're going to do. And I said, okay. The alternative is you lose these drugs. If Congress gets a hold of this, Congresswoman Louise Slaughter has had a bill up there, and as the chairman of the Rules Committee, she can hold committee hearings on anything, and she held one on antibiotic resistance, which was bizarre. But she could force legislation to happen. Not likely to happen in this session because they hardly do any legislating. They did a nice big omnibus budget bill that we're still trying to sort out. But so FDA said 3 years. So that 3 years happens in the middle of December this year. In the middle of December this year, on about 2-day period, all of these drugs will change. Now, you don't think you have heartburn? This represents thousands upon thousands of products in the marketplace. The biggest heartburn I hear is from the poultry industry. They don't even know how this works in an integrated operation. Said, why should there be 3 forms? We own the birds. We're the producer, we're the veterinarian, and we're the feed mill. That's a valid point. So in the middle of December, this is all going to happen. You think about all of these drug changes. So for the commercial side of the industry that many of you all deal with, unless you own a feed mill, how does that work? The marketing department has to determine how much of this product is going to be used in the coming months, buy it accordingly. We've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of product in the warehouse now because the new products are not coming out probably until 2017 with the new labeling on them. So the FDA has agreed we don't have to throw those away. We'll probably be given 6 months to a year to use those premixes up because they run between $100 and $300 a bag. And they have all those claims on there. We're going to stick this little government sticker there in several languages that says after January 1, 2017, use of this product is only under the order of a veterinary feed directive by a veterinarian. And no growth promotion feed efficiency drugs will be allowed. We understand that, But for a marketing department and a feed company, they're going to have to determine how much to buy, how to exhaust that supply, what are our new products going to look like, what are we going to price them as, what are the new products going to cost, how are we going to use those up. And the drug sponsors tell us they are not having a fire sale. Believe it if you like. I don't know how you get down. They're trying to market these things as easily as they can. When are they going to start talking to the feed companies? You got companies like Purina and Cargill are saying, we order this stuff for 87 to 100 plants at one time in warehouses and ship it. We've got lots of this stuff supplied. Drug premixes can last between 1 and 3 years. Okay, so we got a lot of products out in the marketplace. We want to be able to use those. We want to be able to plan what our new products are going to look like, how we're going to label them, what kind of claims they're. Basically, and then you have to register them all with 20-something states that require product registration and get their blessings. It is a massive undertaking in the middle of the Food Safety Modernization Act that all comes to fruition in September as well for us. So we're dramatically, I've added another staff member. During this administration, I've added 4 staff members to keep up with these new types of rules that are coming out. We're very concerned to see what's going to happen in November and what's going to happen in January with all of these laws, but that is a major issue for us. So sometime in December, all of these changes will be affected, and then in January 1, we have to put them in place in the marketplace. I got some good news from FDA. And I rarely, if ever, use the term good in the same sentence as FDA. Rarely. And I'm a product of state feed regulation. I worked for 6.5 years with the Office of the Texas State Chemist as a feed regulatory official before my messiah, Dave Bossman, plucked me out of there to come to work for AFI in 1991. So I've been there for 25 years, and it doesn't seem that long, does it, Dave? I've been there for 25 years and learned a lot. I have a really incredible staff that works on these things. But the good news that FDA said, and they call me, I often tell non-members, who are they going to call if I weren't there? So come join us and help us battle this fray. But I had a call from FDA, Dr. Dan McChesney. I don't know if Dan's the guy that should come and talk to you all at some point in time, maybe next year when all this goes into effect. He is a medical microbiologist, a laid-back, easygoing guy, worked at Walter Reed Army Hospital for years on it's a kind of amazing story on a STD vaccine that never seemed to work with the soldiers. Go figure. Dan said, we're going to call and hold a meeting on minor species to make VFD work for you. And I went, well, that's just amazing. I said, you know, normally you take 10 years to answer my letter. This one's only 8 years old. He said, you wrote a letter? I said, yeah, we wrote a letter to Steve Sudloff and asked you to address the compliance policy guide that allows this in a complicated order method for feeds that are already manufactured with a legal amount to be fed to animals if the veterinarian orders it. But we can't change the nutrition for those products. And sometimes copper and molybdenum kind of need to be a little different for sheep and goats and not for cattle. And he said, okay, we'll go back and look at that and see. We want to make this work. The real problem with making VFD work is you have to force or allow the veterinarian to lie on the form, which is not currently allowed without being a federal knowingly violating the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is a criminal felony. And lots of jail time and stuff. Who watched the Peanut Corporation of America just implode because they were feeding peanut butter that was poison to pets and people and everybody, full of salmonella, and their quality director, et cetera, were falsifying results. The owner got 30 years, his son got 20 years, and the quality director got 5 years, which sent a ripple through the food industry that the courts and FDA are serious about that, and rightly so. So he said he will contact us and call us into a kind of formal meeting where we can discuss. I'm toying with the idea of doing that in advance because that way we have the upper hand and can bring up a lot of issues that they can't in a public setting. Paul, you're familiar with the rule of 7 when they have 7 federal officials in one room, then they got to make it public. But I asked if I could tell the sheep industry this, and he said yes. You have our commitment not to leave you out in the cold. I said, I think they've been out in the cold before, but more than likely they'd like this to work. So Paul, you'll get a call from Dan at some point in time within the next few months of how to make this work. The biggest problem I see, well, there's two. FFA and 4-H has to comply with this. So our companies that give feed to FFA and 4-Hers are going to have to go find a veterinarian to put this drug in. Now, let me give you some caveats from FDA, and these are the real legal issues. The VFD is a permit to use this product in the way the veterinarian wrote it. And he, she can't deviate from what's in the federal regulations governing drugs. Okay? It's also, it's got some limitations on it. And if the veterinarian writes it for prevention claims, and you don't have this disease right now, but all of a sudden you think it's going to happen, and you hold that VFD long enough that the period of use is longer than the term of the VFD, you're in trouble. And the feed company will tell you, I'm going to fill this out, but this is going to expire. It is not like a human script, RX, that you can take, as long as it hasn't expired, the pharmacy can fill it. When it expires, the producer may no longer legally use that product. So that's a different approach to this. And that's a big concern of ours. The other thing is there will be combinations. So a producer will come in and say, here's a VFD, and the veterinarian said, and I want to add a wormer to it. Can I do that? Well, if the combination is approved, there are a lot of wormers approved with these drugs, then he'll say yes. But the veterinarian has to authorize that combination. I don't like that. I told them they were wrong. Our lawyers told them they were wrong. They were insistent, and we pretty much gave in. We are educating the veterinarian community that you need to mark box 3, which says you can do it with any drug, okay? Any drug that's approved. So box 1 says you can do it with no other combination drug. Box 2 says only with the following combination drug, and box 3 with the following. Veterinarians don't know a whole lot about approved feed drugs, and the feed mill is ultimately responsible for putting out a legally labeled and legally formulated product with respect to the drug for the animal in which it's intended. Generics. So generics and pioneer drugs kind of have a marketplace back and forth. When a pioneer drug is approved, they're allowed X number of years until the patent expires in generics. It happens I take Lipitor, and when Lipitor went off patent, the drug went from $200 for a 3-month to about $20. It's just the nature of the game. And I respect that, knowing drug sponsors and the amount of money they've got to spend to get these drugs approved. The last chemical compound to get approval at FDA, who has an idea how long it took? 3,000 days. The Patent Restoration Act allows them to do an extension of that over that time it took, okay? So when that patent has expired, then generics can come into the market. We have a lot of generics. What will happen to generics in this? If the drug sponsor doesn't change the drug other than take claims off, doesn't submit any more data, then the generics can remain in the marketplace. And I know most of them, well, the lion's share, 99% of them are going to do. I know some that are going to change, in which case the generics disappear. Generics are very, very important in marketing, you know, in your production practices, because they're a whole lot more cost effective, let me say it that way. And they're bioequivalent. They work the same way. The other issue that veterinarians don't know about is where a feed mill buys their drugs. There are, for chlorotetracycline, for instance, there are 3 drug sponsor approvals, and there are differences within the withdrawal times and the use things. So the veterinarian has to know where you're going to the feed mill to get your product, so they know, 1, that they have the product, and 2, that they have the product the way the veterinarian is writing the VFD. And so that's an issue. We've got all of these issues in front of FDA. You can't possibly imagine the ones regarding medicated feed blocks, pre-choice minerals, and liquid feed, which they haven't even thought about. That's on the kind of back burner for me to run up there and talk to them about and get those problems sorted out. So I understand that many of the drugs that you use that are now over the counter, well, most all of them, will go under the control of a veterinary feed directive. You have a strong advocate in me. I am a producer advocate. We work with producer organizations. I've known Paul since he had brown hair. And we're going to be up there advocating because it's not just your issue. It is across animal agriculture and the 173 million tons of feed we manufacture in the United States, of which 55% is poultry feed. And those people, as I heard last week at the Poultry Feed and Meat Show with 30,000 of my best friends in Atlanta, are really not happy about it and want to know how it's going to work for, what do you call them, complexes. Am I going to have to write a BFD for every house? No. Will I be able to write it for the whole complex if they're all in the same growing phase and the same animals and the same production class? You probably will. But you fill out that VFD electronically once, and then you can go pick the addresses again and send it all to them. It's all going to be automated, but in the interim, we're all going to go crazy on how the paperwork works. So have faith that we're negotiating these things. I, along with Dave Bossman, authored this rule. We know how it should work. And the FDA is listening to us because I got a big stick and can generate a whole lot of letters from Congress, as you probably can as well. So that's the message I'm coming to bring you. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. Oh, the other thing I want to talk about is the vet-patient-client relationship. Hello. We've stayed out of that because of my love for veterinarians. And it's not simply that, it's that the AVMA needed to wade into that and deal with that, as did the sheep veterinarians and the bovine practitioners and the avian pathologists, or I think they call them avian practitioners. And they have for the most part. So here's the way it works. So on growth promotion, you feed a constant level. And I don't think you have a whole lot of growth promotion drugs, Paul, if I'm correct. So yours are therapeutic. So you're getting sucked into this kind of sideline. So these drugs that you use therapeutically, FDA says, cannot be used over and over and over again because the practice laws don't allow it. The veterinarian needs to see this animal and understand that feeding that drug failed to work. So they need to address that in a way that the practice laws say they should. We kind of stay out of that. So this rule says where the state has a veterinary practice law that governs patient-client relationship, veterinary patient-client relationship, then that one will operate provided it is equal to or stronger than the federal rule. If it doesn't, then the federal rule applies. So you can't keep writing these BFDs, and please don't call them scripts because they're not. BFDs over and over and over again without having knowledge and supervision of the animals. Some state practice acts require them to see the animals, and I thought Georgia's one of those and was trying to change it, and I was told they changed it, and then I was told they didn't. I don't really know. So we don't deal with that, but we get the questions from our members about, we got a VFD and the producer wants to know XYZ, so we're trying to address those with FDA as we get them, and with AVMA. Dr. Christine Wong at AVMA, Paul, you know Christine, don't you? Yeah, I know Christine well. She was an intern in Washington, and we housed her for an 8-month, 9-month period. So she's really sharp veterinarian, is dealing with this with us and is on our Veterinary Feed Directive working group. So that is an issue in how your veterinarian interacts with your animals and the producer. And I don't tend to know a lot about that. I'm not a Practice Act knowledge guy. I know a whole hell of a lot about feed laws, and I've written 20 of them myself, so I know how they work. So with that, I'm glad to, I hope you're feeling better that you have an advocate here. Just because we wrote this didn't mean we liked it. We were trying to protect our industry and yours. But take your first hit.
Richard.
Dave.
Go back to the vet
Patient, yeah.
relationship again.
Yeah, the VCBR.
Yeah, back in the old days when we were creating this thing, the vet didn't have to see the animals every time. Is that still?
No, well, it says knowledge of and supervision is what the rule said. And that's really, I mean, think about the poultry industry where an integrator has a veterinarian in a complex. He's not out there to all those. He's got a service guy. He's bringing in data. He's bringing in dead birds to post. He's bringing in blood tests. And the veterinarian's looking at all of those. That's knowledge and supervision of those animals in FDA's eyes. So If you're hiring a dog and cat vet to write your VFD because he's $5 and your regular vet's $20, think about that. I don't know that that's going to be legally working, and that doesn't do you isn't in your best interest in my. But I'm not giving you legal advice, and I'm not giving you veterinary advice. You need to work with your veterinarians to make this happen. It is not rocket science, and AVMA is working to train veterinarians on an online thing to do this. And I think, like, it's not rocket science. They just need to have knowledge of these drugs and buy into Global Vet Link or Ag Data or whatever these companies are that work these things. Yes, ma'am.
So
Melanie.
as nutritionists, we have to, for all of our custom feeds, go to the local vet for our customers, our clients, and tell them, or send them our ration and say, we want to feed X amount of local vet or whatever for these lambs. And then wait until they get us the VFD back.
In essence, yes, but that's a little bit backwards, although the law doesn't prohibit that. So the way FDA envisions it is the veterinarian who has knowledge of those animals says you need this drug and tells the producer in the feed mill. If a feed mill wants to, in fact, say, and the problem with this is there is no prohibition about making these drugs in advance and floor stocking them or keeping them in inventory. And at some point in time, you've got to have a formulation ready in case it comes up, because there are, what are those feeds called? Economy feeds, right, Dave? There's economy feeds that the bags and the products never change forever. I used to buy economy feeds for my backyard chickens. So the idea is the veterinarian actually is going to initiate that. But if you need to manufacture things to have on in your inventory, it doesn't prohibit you from doing that, and you do not have to have a VFD. Remember, the acknowledgement letter you gave the drug sponsor says, we will not release any VFD drug or feed, meaning the premixes, the drugs, or actually the medicated feeds, without a similar letter from a feed distributor, not a producer, or a valid VFD. You have control of the drugs, likely. And also, if you deal, like we've got some companies that deal almost exclusively through dealers. Dave, you work for what? Kent Feeds does that. If you're going to send them products that you manufacture, all they have to do is sign that acknowledgement letter and understand the legal ramifications. One of our problems is the retail establishment. Blocks and medicated feeds that are on the floor will disappear from the floor. Ethel and Joe at the cash register will look at that VFD and have a general knowledge. We're going to do a video training for those people. And then they're going to authorize it, pay for it, and take it back to Jack in the back, who's got real knowledge of that and says this is how it's going to work and whether you are. And if they don't have it right, if the vet doesn't have it right, which is a lot of problems. And we don't see, you don't see vets being warned or going to jail for that because the feed industry fixes it. We won't fill it. It's our product without going back to the vet and getting it right. So unfortunately, they'll have to tell the producer this is wrong, you need to go get this done with the vet, and they're going to have a deeper knowledge of Veterinary Feed Directive. What we see, I'll give you an example of what companies tell me from veterinarians. A veterinarian from a state in which the feed mill is not located, and we used to have license number and state of licensing for the vet, which made us police these things, which was really stupid. Called the feed company, or the feed company called the vet and said, you didn't fill out the address for these animals. And he said, well, why do I need that? Well, because the law and the rules say we've got to have the address of where these animals are on this form to justify it for our records and delivery. And he said, well, and there was a long pause, and the veterinarian said, we wanted it for all the pigs we grow in Oklahoma. You laugh, he didn't understand that doesn't work. We have to have those location addresses right off. And that's the kind of lack of knowledge that's out there. It's not rocket science, but somebody's got to train veterinarians in the marketplace to make this work. But you can manufacture products and have them ready for your customers. Yeah. Other questions? Uh-oh. You're my new best friend. We need to chat. We need to exchange emails.
You know, I'm kind of tired of the dog chasing his tail.
Yeah.
said, I'm kind of tired of the dog chasing its tail.
Yeah.
The crux of this thing is, you start naming me the antibiotics that are therapeutically approved levels that work in the minor species. And quite frankly, I only know of one, it's only force. So virtually, this regulation has cut off the minor species, sheep, goats, deer, and whatever, and because there's no off-label use. So we can talk about how it works and how it affects the feed company and how the veterinarians don't know what they're doing and how often they got to be at the place and all those things. But at the end of the day, the government hasn't funded, approval for minor species for several years, and now they're putting the minor species in a position where there's nothing they can use.
And therein lies the centerpiece of this industry's beef. Lamb. And I completely understand that, and that's why we've been bitching at FDA over it, and they've come to us and said, we're not going to leave you out in the cold. I also am aware of two drug sponsors that are working on new products that are probably in process. They won't tell me for sure because they don't like to talk about that stuff. I understand what's happening, and I understand that we can get a resolution of this via this compliance policy guide in a way that's not clear to all of us yet. And I think by January 1, you'll have more drugs available to your industry than you do, under VFD than you do now, believe it or not. I have to trust what they're saying because they called me, and that doesn't happen very often. Other questions?
Go ahead.
What regulatory agency would be the one to examine your paper trail?
Your paper trail, okay. There's a document provision in the Veterinary Feed Directive final rule. It says the producer, the veterinarian, and the feed company has to keep it for 3 years. We're subject to inspections under the Good Manufacturing Practices regulations that have been out there since 1973 for medicated feeds. Licensed feed mills have regular inspections based on risk, and there are, out of the 6,000 feed mills in the United States, there are 1,057 licensed facilities. So at any point in time, a federal official can come in there and say, I'm here to see your VFDs or your records regarding VFD, which in the producer's case is a VFD. I have never seen FDA or heard of FDA coming to a producer for those. They do come to producers for drug residues violations that are reported to them by USDA. The follow-up is 20–30% that they have found a reason that this occurred. They're not related to feed. They're almost always injectable oral dosage form or illegal compounding by a veterinarian. So we don't see those in feed. You're not likely, personally, you're not likely to see a visit to a producer by a federal or state official that has these. What I did do, the pork industry said when the EPA released some names and addresses of water permitted facilities, activist groups got a hold of them, and one of the big pork leaders, who's a veterinarian as well, said they visited his house and set a barbecue grill on fire and shoved it up against his house, and he didn't want that to happen again. So we committed to going out and looking at inspection reports, and of the 150 inspection reports we requested, we reviewed all of the records that they gave us related to VFDs, and they looked at VFDs in all of those cases, but there were no copies of VFDs in those records, which is what they shouldn't be doing. If they're legal, they shouldn't copy them. If they're illegal, they shouldn't have gotten out of the feed plant, but they may copy them. But I wanted to make sure I couldn't see a copy making a citizen request to look at those records. So FDA's doing as good a job as I could tell with the records that I looked at. So yeah, producers subject to a review by a federal or state official under state feed laws, but in reality, unless you have a residue, it won't occur. Who else? Mr. Chairman, I yield you back 6 minutes. Thank you for the invitation, and eat more lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Sellers. At this time, we're going to talk about another issue, the H2A sheep herder issue, and I'm going to call forth Kelly Griffith. Kelly? There she is. And she'll introduce the following two speakers.
That's how you clear a stage, right? Well, hello, I'm Kelly Griffith with Mountain Plains Ag Service, and would like to welcome these two gentlemen, Mr. Brian Pasternak and Mr. Jim Kessler. They're both with the U.S. Department of Labor. Mr. Pasternak's with the Office of Foreign Labor Certification.